What is going on to all my Barry fans out there, and welcome back to my channel, MovieFiles. We are back with our weekly Barry discussions. I'm so happy to be back with you all, but I'm going to be honest, as a fan of this series, it's a bittersweet moment for me right now because on one hand, I am so excited that we get this fourth season less than a year before season 3 premiered, but then on the other hand, it is the fourth and final season. Now, as a fan of TV, I always can appreciate when showrunners know when they want to end a show on a high note. They're not going to drag things along, which can really hurt the legacy of a show. So I do appreciate that. But then also I can't acknowledge we're weeks away before this show is officially over. So in the meantime, we got an episode 1 to talk about, and tonight's episode being titled Yikes, as we see all of our main characters dealing with the ramifications after Barry was caught and arrested. We got so much to break down, but before we get into it, let's start the conversation in the comments below. Now, we're just talking about episode 1 because I haven't seen episode 2 as I'm pre-recording this, but let me know your pros, your cons, your thoughts, your theories after watching this episode 1 in the comments below. And of course, if you all appreciated my review today, consider hitting that like button, also sharing this video, and of course consider subscribing to the channel. So with all that being said, this episode was fantastic. We got to break it down. Full spoilers ahead. As we open the episode with the news reporting on Barry being caught and arrested, we see the guards are watching this and they are excited to have a celebrity on their hands, as we cut to seeing Barry immediately getting perks for being a celebrity as the guards allow him to call Jean. And during this conversation, we see the first question that Barry has for Jean is, was he tricked by Jean and Jim Moss? Now, Barry tells him that he was only there to protect Jean because he was worried about him, and he tells him, as he did in the season 3 finale, that he loves Jean. Now, Jean in response tells him the same thing he said to Barry, which was he's got him caught. Now, I'm very excited to see Barry exploring this lack of father in his life, because that has been a very big theme in this series, him wanting this father figure to be someone he can look up to, whether it is Fuchs, whether in this case it's Jean. So I'm very intrigued to see if this final season will be exploring Barry's past and actually meeting his actual father, which was actually potentially hinted at a little bit later in this episode. Let's switch gears and actually talk about Jean here throughout this episode, as we see him immediately meeting with the attorney who was at the press conference about Barry being caught. He tells Jean that he will probably be a key witness in this trial, which it probably will go to trial. And also in this episode, we see that Jean's career has continued to take off from last season due to Barry's help, as Jim watches him on stage and we see them go have a conversation in Jean's dressing room, and Jim brings up that a reporter wants to interview him about the case and also about his daughter, but Jim knows that the media just wants this as headlines and that it will probably be a bad idea to talk to them because it would probably affect the case. More on that plot a little bit later, but I do want to mention that I feel as though Jim knows that Jean is hiding something, and that maybe Jim's going to learn that Barry was actually the one responsible for getting Jean's foot back into Hollywood's door, and maybe Jim's going to find out some other secrets that Jean's been hiding. So I'm very curious to see how this relationship's going to pan out between Jean and Jim in this season. Speaking of relationships, let's talk about what Sally has going on in her relationship with her family in this episode. As we know from last season, she was heading back home after being canceled and losing her 15 minutes of fame after getting caught on camera snapping on Natalie in the elevator. As we see her on the plane, she's taking a nap and she's having this dream, or some might call it a nightmare, as she hears a little kid in the seat in front of her laughing, and it's revealed to not be a little kid, but instead it's the biker guy that she killed in self-defense from last season. Now, it appears that after killing him that this haunts her, which is understandable, but the fact that she heard a little kid laughing before seeing him, to me, was very interesting. It was almost like she might feel that she killed an innocent person, which we know as an audience that that guy was not innocent. He was there to kill her and Barry, but at the same time, it has me thinking maybe Sally subconsciously feels like she killed the innocent or the little girl inside of her after killing someone for the first time. But I also want to point out that it is important to remember the fact that she got away with killing someone. Again, I know it was self-defense, but she still got away with it. So I'm very interested to see if that comes to light in this fourth and final season. As we see Sally's phone is blowing up about the fact that Barry was arrested, we see Sally, who loves to lie, as her agent calls her and she talks about lying about being with Barry. But at first she's under the impression that maybe the news got out that she killed someone and that Barry might not be taking the blame for that. But instead she learns that Barry was arrested after killing Janice the night that she went missing, and she is in complete shock. Which, speaking of shock, her mom in this episode was very shocking, and we'll talk about that here, as her mom is picking her up from the airport, and immediately we see that she is very impatient with Sally, and she's really not even really excited to see her daughter. She even asks her, "Why are you here visiting?" As we pivot over to seeing Sally having a panic attack in a car, and her mother could care less about what she's got going on as she just continues to order her food to go. Now, to me, it came off that her mother has done this type of thing with Sally before, where she has these panic attacks, but more particularly the fact that it seems as though that she is implying in this episode that Sally tends to find herself in these circumstances, and her mom doesn't really feel as though that Sally is a victim in these situations, that more or less Sally might gravitating towards these toxic relationships on purpose. So I'm very interested to see how much more of this subplot that we get with Sally and her relationship with her parents, which brings us into her going back home, and she finds out that her room's been converted into her father's man cave, and we have Barry calling Sally. He wants to talk to her, but we see Sally declines the call, and she tells him that she never wants to talk to him again and he should never call her again, and she calls him a liar. Now, that is a very interesting choice of words from Sally, because we know she has lied a lot throughout this series, and it'll be interesting to see if Barry keeps his promise in protecting her about what she did in killing that biker man. But let's talk about Sally and her dad, who I get the impression that her dad seems to be more interested in her career, but also more importantly, more interested in her as a person more than her mother, as he tries to get her out of her head about the news that went on with Barry, as he suggests that they watch her show as a family together after dinner, which we see the scene play out, and her dad seems to be a very nice person. He seems to be the complete opposite than what her mother is, and I love how this first episode has kind of established the two sides that we've seen in the Sally character. On one hand, we can see her father seems to be a loving individual, and we've seen those traits from Sally, and then on the other hand, we see her mother being kind of judgmental, very self-centered, and we've seen those traits from Sally as well. So I love the duality that we have here with her parents in this first episode, as we see them watching her television show, and her mother points out the lack of truths that she's seeing on screen, as her mom isn't impressed, especially after she hears Sally's ex-husband get brought up, which we know he is Sam, and this is where we get a very uncomfortable situation at hand with them kind of fighting, as Sally's mom doesn't believe that Sally is a victim regarding her last relationship with Sam, and even goes a step further and kind of implies that maybe Barry being arrested, she might have something to do with that situation, as she tells Sally that she sure knows how to pick them, which to me was just so mind-boggling. It really comes off as though Sally's mom does not like her at all, as Sally just wants her mother to help, and she just doesn't want to help her at this point. We see Sally exploding at her mother, which leads to her walking away, and this is where her father, as you can imagine, this is probably something they did when Sally was growing up as a kid. They get into a lot of fights, and the father's kind of left with picking up the pieces or trying to get the mother and daughter on the same page, as he offers her a job so they can spend more time together. So let's talk about this scene here. I think it's important to note that this show has given us more of her anger being pent up inside of her. This dates back to season 2 when she was lashing out at Barry. We even saw that, of course, in the season 3 when she was defending herself and she ended up killing that biker, and her yelling at her mom in this episode, which I don't blame her. Her mom was being kind of an asshole at her in this episode. I can't lie. But again, I'm just so curious to see if the Sally going down this path of darkness, will she kill again, especially knowing the fact that she's back at home? And I wouldn't be surprised if she runs into Sam again. Who's to say that she might not end up killing him? So very, very interested to see what they do with Sally in this 4th season. But now it's time to talk about the star of the show, who also directed this episode and will be directing all the episodes in this season. And that's checking in on Barry and Fuchs in prison. Now we see Barry is noticing that the inmates are kind of eyeing him as he walks past Fuchs, who he he didn't know that they were going to be in the same prison. Which, speaking of, we see Fuchs is talking to the FBI about getting protection from Barry, and this is where the FBI can care less about his safety. But then we know Fuchs, he's always manipulating or trying to get his way into situations. He tells them that the Janice murder was just a small part of Barry's dark past, and he cuts a deal with them, which he's going to wear a wire, and they're going to agree to protect him, but also promise to give him a new life outside of prison. Now, after seeing Barry having to call two people that he loved and them completely destroying the connections between them, we see Barry in this episode, he's just alone. He just wanted to seek love as he's in the courtyard, and he has this kind of midday hallucination as he believes he sees Sally reading the script on the stairs, similar to the same scene in season 1 when he first met Sally, as they're recreating briefly the scene in which he meets the other people from the acting class. But that is shortly after Fuchs walks out of the door. Now we see Fuchs, who's done this in the past, trying to catch Barry off guard. He does such a terrible job of trying to get Barry to confess his crimes, as we know he's wearing the wire at this point. But Barry's first words were, "Did I put you here?" And he is not fueled by anger in his past with his relationship with Fuchs, which is very surprising. As Barry continues to go a step further, he confesses to him that he was right in telling him that he shouldn't trust Gene and that he should have never taken those classes to change himself and be a better person. He apologized to him, and you see this immediately affects Fuchs, and him ratting out Barry might not be the case in this season, which we'll be talking about here in a second. But while that's going on, let's check in with our favorite couple, and that is Hank and Cristobal. See, Hank and Cristobal are living a very happy and safe life in Santa Fe, but it's clear that Hank is still on high alert for their safety as they're looking to make this a permanent living situation. But they find out from the owner of this Airbnb that they're staying at that the market is struggling and there isn't any new homes being built because there's a shortage of sand, which needs to be imported from Asia and Africa, which leads to Cristobal coming up with the plan to get this international sand and doing this under the radar and making this some type of business. And this will be their chance to be the top dogs that both of them have dreamed of. So we see clearly in this scene that Hank sees that Cristobal maybe misses their time as being crime lords and being in a criminal underground, and he wants to kind of help him in this moment. Putting a focus on what's going on with Hank in this episode, who has a similar nightmare of what Sally did when she was facing death in this episode. We see Hank having a nightmare, reliving the moment from last season when he was captured, and this time around he actually has his best pal Barry, who's chained up next to him, actually asks Barry what should they do. And that's important to remember because we always know throughout this series, whenever Hank needed someone to help him out of crazy situations, who's the person that he always calls? And that is Barry, which leads us to seeing Hank waking up, and he immediately calls Barry, but he sees that the police picks up the phone, and this is where Hank finds out that Barry's been arrested online. Now we see Hank decides to go ahead and do the plan with Cristobal with getting the sand over to where they are, but we all know secretly he's really doing this to get back to LA so he can probably help out Barry in the situation, which will wrap all this up in the final scenes here. We see Barry finally snapping, slapping himself in the face, yelling in the mirror, calling himself a POS, as we have a guard coming in trying to calm down Barry and give him some words of encouragement. Now he tells Barry that just because he did a bad thing, it doesn't make him a bad person, and he goes even further and says that he's done great things. He was in the Marines, he's actually been on television and actually on a good show. Now, giving Barry hope and all these kind words, you would think that this is the stuff that Barry has been seeking throughout this episode. He's been looking for kindness, he's been looking for acceptance, he's been looking for love, especially from people like Gene and Sally, which they didn't give him that. And Barry doesn't take this kindness at all, but instead, Barry wants to feel the actual pain, and this is kind of a way of him punishing himself, as he tells that same guard that he is a cop killer and goes a step further and says that he'll not only kill this guard, but he'll kill everyone that loves him. Now we see the guard change his tone in this scene as he closes the door, pulls out his weapon, and we see blood coming from Barry's head. Now we cut cut to him as a young child, and we hear kind of the similar sounds and noises from when he was on that beach with all his victims from last season. As we see, little Barry is running across this kind of empty field, and you'll notice in the background there are two random guys there, and there's also kids running as well. And then you can hear kind of faintly this man is calling for Barry in the distance, and we see Barry turn around and waves at him. Now let's analyze this scene for a second here. Now, was this some type of camp where Barry's father potentially took him to toughen him up, to torture him, to get him to become the man that he is today? Or was that Fuchs that was calling him in the background? Let me know your thoughts on that. But I do think, again, I would really love to explore the relationship between Barry and his father. Is he dead? Is he alive? Did he even meet his father? Or again, was that Fuchs in this scene? I'm very curious to learn more about his past. But going back to Barry, he wakes up to Fuchs, who manages to have the guard stop beating him. And we see Fuchs throws his wire away, and he tells Barry that he took advantage of him and that he's sorry, but more importantly, that he loves him. That's right. He tells Barry, "I love you." Those were the words that Barry was looking for this entire episode, as it appears so far that their relationship is maybe back on sync, and the key word being maybe, as we end with these final scenes of seeing Gene, who calls the same reporter with his Batman voice to meet up, and he wants to talk about how he caught Barry. Now, you'll notice that this wasn't the first time that Gene has called this reporter, because his wife said it's the same guy with the Batman voice, which makes me question, wait, what about the conversation he had with Jim about not talking to the reporters because he know that will affect the case? So what is Gene's play in the situation? Is it to get more notoriety, more fame of being the hero in the situation? Or will we see Gene threaten the reporter to leave Jim alone and not get involved in the situation? I'm not sure what is going on with Gene, but I'm very curious to see what finds out. But overall, y'all, this episode was just a reminder of how phenomenal the show is. Bill Hader, his direction was absolutely incredible in this episode. The writing was so poignant. And yes, Barry has destroyed everything he's touched since joining the acting class, but we see in this episode in particular how our main characters, they were already broken before they met Barry. It will be so interesting to see all these characters throughout this final season, especially when you look at Hank and Cristobal's relationship as they plan to get back into the business and dealing with criminals for the sand. It'll be really interesting to see that complicated relationship. Especially, will they be going down separate paths? Will Cristobal continue to want to live this lifestyle? And we know NoHo Hank maybe wants to not get back into this lifestyle, but we also know that Hank wants to help Barry, and we know Cristobal isn't the biggest fan of Barry while he's trying to rebuild his empire. But speaking of relationship, let's talk about Gene. He continues to go on this path of redemption that we saw him doing last season, or will that side of him return with this reporter, and will him and Jim have a good relationship this season, or will things go south after Jim finds out about his deep secrets that he's been hiding? Speaking of hiding, Sally's anger seems to be taking over, and it'll be very interesting to see if she kills again or if she'll tell the truth about what happened about killing that biker from last season. And speaking of killing, let's talk about Barry and Fuchs on the same page while being in prison. The question is, how long will this good relationship, or at least at the moment, good relationship last? Can we see them being broken out of jail? I theorized that about that last season. If we see Barry get caught, he's going to probably be broken out, which I still think that could be the case. And I wouldn't be surprised if NoHo Hank is the one that breaks them out. Will we see Barry kill again is a big question, right? So I think this season, our characters having their looking in the mirror, facing their faith, and revealing their truths and their secrets. I cannot wait to find out. Yes, it hurts my heart to say that this is the final season, but I'm pretty sure and confident that we're going to end on a high. I love this show. I love this first episode. I'm about to start episode 2 as we speak, and I want to know, before we wrap this up, what did you all think about this first episode? Again, pros, cons, your thoughts, your theories for the weeks ahead. And of course, just a friendly reminder that we will be doing these weekly breakdowns every single week after the episode ends. And as I'm pre-recording this, my episode 2 breakdown will be available in the description of this video. So before we head out, thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed today's breakdown, consider consider hitting that like button. Consider sharing this video and leaving your thoughts and theories on this final season in the comments below. As you can see on the screen now, click my face here so you can join the community. Check out my previous reviews that I've done for Barry and click the video here so you can see my review for episode 2. You all have been awesome. Hope you're staying safe. We'll catch you all on the next breakdown.